60-mile-an-hour gusts possible, so do take care because there could be some travel disruption and large waves. Temperatures quite disappointing, ranging between 9-10 degrees Celsius, but probably feeling closer to 2 or 4 degrees when you are exposed to that wind. Showers continuing, particularly across the northern half of the UK throughout Wednesday night, generally easing off a bit more across Wales, central southern areas of England. But again, those clear spells will allow temperatures to drop off once again and feeling quite chilly. Into Thursday daytime, the winds will be easing off now across southern areas of the UK, helping it to just feel that slightly bit better compared to Wednesday, but actually quite blustery still across Northern Ireland and northern areas of England. It's remaining unsettled then as we move throughout Thursday and Friday, with another area of low pressure possibly pushing into southern areas of the UK. Potential, though, that things dry up as we head into the weekend, but there's still always the chance that we see further rain in the north and west. Otherwise, bye-bye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Fear not, I'm back from my Easter observance on State of the Nation tonight. The American President, Joe Biden, is arriving in Belfast any minute now. We'll be bringing you live coverage as it happens, and I'll be telling you why I think the so-called special relationship is sentimental hyperbole. The 4-day junior doctors' strike begins, time to cause maximum pain to patients. Should doctors strike at all? Well, none of them were willing to speak to GB News today, and here's a taste. One of them, was willing to speak to GB News today, and here's what he had to say.
What we need to do is understand that doctors are the solution, not the problem.
And I agree with the young man, which is why I don't think he should be on strike. And the civil service taking days off due to stress. On your shilling, surely they just need a good old-fashioned dose of the British stiff upper lip. And perhaps some more time at the office too. We'll be debating that shortly. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be hearing from our esteemed panel, Jacob Reynolds of the Academy of Ideas. It's always a pleasure to have a fellow Jacob on, and former Labour councillor, Mr Kevin Craig. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the show. Email us, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But now it's time for the all-important headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story tonight, the Police Federation of Northern Ireland says 4 suspected pipe bombs found near Londonderry is a clear statement of intent to harm police officers. Police in Northern Ireland made the discovery in a cemetery in Cregan during a public safety operation. Officers had petrol bombs, stones and bottles thrown at their vehicles yesterday. The PSNI has called the placement of the suspected bombs a further sinister and worrying development. It follows violent scenes in Londonderry yesterday. Now, the US President says he'll use his visit to Northern Ireland to keep the peace as he left the US for his 4-day trip. Joe Biden is now in the air and he's on his way to Belfast, where he'll land this evening, sometime after 9 o'clock, to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Tomorrow, he's expected to meet Stormont's main political parties, as well as travel to the Republic of Ireland. Now, hospital bosses say they're worried about overnight care tonight as they struggle to find cover during junior doctor strikes in England. Thousands of British Medical Association members have begun 4 days of industrial action starting today. Downing Street was refusing to hold further talks with the union unless it abandoned its 35% pay rise demand and called off the strikes. Experts have been warning the walkout could be the most disruptive in NHS history, with up to 350,000 appointments and surgeries cancelled. The International Monetary Fund predicts the UK economy won't shrink this year by quite as much as they originally thought, but it is on track to be the worst performing amongst the G7 nations. The IMF has upgraded its forecast, saying it expects the economy to contract by just 0.3% this year. That's an improvement of just over 0.5% from previous estimates. It then projects it'll recover by 1% by next year. Labour has launched a new advert claiming the Prime Minister is personally responsible for the country's economic struggles. The Twitter ad put out today says Rishi Sunak thinks it's right to raise taxes for working people whilst his family benefited from a tax loophole. It's the second attack on the Prime Minister in as many days in the run-up to May's local elections, after Labour accused him of not sending child sex abusers to prison yesterday. Both ads have angered MPs, including those within the Labour Party. And lastly, winds of up to 60 miles an hour are expected overnight tonight as the UK is set to face unsettled weather over the coming days. Yellow weather warnings for wind and rain are in place until tomorrow, with the Met Office warning people they may have to deal with persistent rain and difficult travel problems. It said a blast of cold air tomorrow also could come in the morning, seeing an increased risk of snow over northern parts of the UK and 8 flood alerts remain in place across southern England. We'll keep you up to date on that story as well, right here on GB News. For now, back to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Our most important foreign relationship is unquestionably with the United States. It is our biggest and strongest ally, and inevitably it is overwhelming in the UK's interest to get on with the US. So much depends on that country, its economic strength, its military strength, its commitment through NATO to freedom within Europe. But we have to remember that though for us it is our most important relationship, that's true of every other country with the United States. The relationship of Ireland with the US is its most important relationship. The relationship of Germany with the US is its most important relationship. The US has many special relationships. We only have one. And it's important to remember this and not to become too doughy-eyed, too sentimental about what the special relationship means. It is in our interest, in our selfish interest, to get on with the United States. As a matter of realpolitik, it is important. But voters in the United States are not going to vote for a party because it does something nice for the UK. They will vote on domestic policy, and that will be what is at the forefront of the minds of American politicians, even ones who are ostensibly friendly to the United Kingdom. And our interests can never be expected to outrun that, to be more powerful than that. And we know this throughout the history of our relationship, that the United States did not join us in World War II. The United States, at the beginning of the Falklands, was flirting with supporting Argentina. Al Haig, the then Secretary of State, was very unsympathetic to British interests. Fortunately, Caspar Weinberger, the Defence Secretary, was more sympathetic. Equally, we didn't support the United States in Vietnam. Harold Wilson refused to do so, and we did support them in Iraq. Tony Blair made that decision. So we have to take the relationship as one of independent countries who have vested interests that will not be overridden by a particular ally. And that if we take that as our understanding and don't view it as a bosom friendship of two countries that will always do the same thing, we may have a more grown-up view of the United States, and we may also find that over coming decades other relationships become as if not more important. I think in 50 years, our relationship with India could be more important than our relationship with the United States as its economy grows and its global influence grows. And it's important to see the visit of US President Biden in this context. His visit isn't really about peace in Northern Ireland. It is an election campaign trip appealing to Irish Americans to show how Irish he is. He is dressing up in green cloth to show that he is Irish and that therefore they should vote for him. It is about the next US presidential election in 2024, not about domestic affairs in Northern Ireland or in the Republic of Ireland. And indeed, if it were, you couldn't expect Joe Biden to be on our side, because historically he wasn't. Joe Biden's record on Northern Ireland is appalling. In the 1980s, he was against extraditing IRA terrorists. He and his friends in the Senate tried to delay and stop an extradition treaty that would have made it easier for us to get dangerous people extradited from the US. He said, if we ratify this treaty, this was a treaty being put forward by Ronald Reagan, we will be admitting that the justice system in Northern Ireland is fair, a notion I absolutely abhor. Joe Biden, now parading as the supporter and almost father figure of the peace process, is somebody who abhorred justice in Northern Ireland. He thought it didn't exist. And he also said in a letter that came out relatively recently, but on Senate writing paper, in my mind, and this is Joe Biden's mind, it is far preferable to allow occasional judicial mistakes than to codify an approach that would have, for example, required the US to send distant Indians in the 1940s to England to stand trial. Now, apart from the fact that this was nonsense, they wouldn't have stood trial in England but in India, so it was historically foolish. It shows a lack of support for the UK and a sympathy to Irish republicanism, which again is all about US domestic politics, not about the peace process. And hence you have the photograph, which is shown here, of Biden with Jerry Adams and Rita O'Hare, who was convicted of terrorist-related activities. So you have this really bad track record of Joe Biden in relation to the UK, in relation to Northern Ireland, who is now coming to wrap himself in a green flag for the election in 2024. Not special relationship, not to do with US-UK relations, but to do with a general election. But of course, I want to know what you at home think too, so please get in touch. Email me at mailmog@gbnews.uk. But I'm now joined, I'm very pleased to be joined, by a personal friend of the President's and a member of the Democratic National Committee of California, Bob Mulholland. Mr. Mulholland, thank you so much for joining me. Your president, President Joe Biden's track record in the 1980s of trying to stop extradition treaties didn't make him seem very tough on the IRA back then. Why should we now think he's so committed to peace in Northern Ireland, not arguing for a unified Ireland?
Well, that you give the assumption that the UK was on the right side of that issue. Fortunately, President Clinton come up with the Good Friday Agreement, and we've had some years, 25 years of calmness. Look at, as you mentioned, Prime Minister Wilson said to President Johnson when he called about Vietnam, no thanks, we're staying out of that. But, you know, and that was the right decision by Prime Minister Wilson, but it didn't mean that we didn't have a special relationship, which was coined by Winston Churchill in 1946. Hey, I'll just add that it was Prime Minister Tony Blair, when he was Prime Minister, that announced the last check was going to America to pay off the World War II loan. I think the UK was the only one to pay off that loan. So it is a special relationship.
But doesn't the US have special relationships with so many countries, whereas we have one? So, I mean, the US relationship with Israel is very important. The US relationship with Ireland is very important, whereas the UK has a single special relationship. So it's a different proportion from your side.
Well, yes, we almost speak the same language, and that's helpful. The Queen that passed away recently was a big factor for that. Much of the American people loved her, and it is true that there is many millions of Irish Americans, but there's also millions of German Americans. I just think, given the history of the potato famine to now, and I was born and grew up in Philadelphia, and when I was there recently, I was at the dock and I saw this big plaque about the Irish landing there, the potato famine. And my grandparents come from Ireland, Northern Ireland, so there's millions of Americans. And I would disagree with you a little bit that President Biden has gone to Ireland because of his election. I think, given that we, America, paid a big place in the Good Friday Agreement, this is an acknowledgement of the role we did. Just like President Clinton got an agreement with Israel and Jordan, just like President Carter got an agreement between Israel and Egypt. All this counts. But yes, America does have relationships with a lot of countries, but it is a special one with the UK.
And it's important in NATO, and the US and UK have worked very closely together, but I just wonder whether we get too sentimental about it, that it is a relationship of mutual self-interest that works when our self-interests coincide, but actually doesn't when it doesn't, and it doesn't lead to special treatment for the UK. For example, we're not at any immediate prospect of getting a free trade deal with the US.
Yeah, good luck with that. Look, even in our Congress, we have two different parties, and we look like an LA freeway changing lanes all the time. So that's normal. The most important factor is that we, since in 1783, the King of England said, okay, you're going to get independence. We've kept a relationship, and we've had our differences. In fact, the British came over in the War of 1812 and tried to burn down the White House and our capital. But we forgave you, and we're continuing our relationship.
Indeed, and the White House was painted white as a result of the singeing, I think, that it got in 1812. But the special relationship today, I just wonder whether that is still overstated, that it's not to say there aren't commonalities, but it's that American politics is, for very good reasons, much more domestically focused than it is foreign affairs focused, and that you wouldn't really expect a foreign country to rank in American electoral politics.
Correct, and I was disappointed at the Tories in '92 when they were trying to interfere with Bill Clinton's time at Oxford. I was in the Prime Minister's office once. Tony Blair was there. It was his office, but he wasn't there. And I looked over and I saw three phones. One was to Dublin, one was to Moscow, and one was to Washington, D.C. So I saw that as an important relationship, and I assume those phones are still there.
Well, I don't know whether they do it that way, but I believe the telephone in the cabinet war rooms was still connected to the White House 40 years after the war rooms had been locked up. So the telephones aren't necessarily used as often as they might be. But I want to come back to this visit of President Biden, because American presidents do make a habit of going to Ireland before an election. There was the great visit by President Obama when he said he was from the famous Irish Obama family, which I thought at least joked about the reality of using a visit to Ireland for electoral purposes?
Yeah, and I think that's important. Look, the only thing that's different is the Secret Service got to drive on the left-hand side of the road. Actually, the presidents usually close the roads. But President, I'm old enough to know remember President Kennedy's visit to Ireland. And it had a big impact on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think that's important. We're friends. We will always be friends. And let's remain and keep that special relationship.
And I absolutely agree that we're friends and that we have similar constitutional evolution. We have similar respect for the law. It's really the extent to which it's overstated, and that we in the UK cannot expect US politics to change for our convenience. And actually, the Falklands is a very good example of this. The State Department did not want to support the UK in 1982, and we were very lucky that Caspar Weinberger took a different view.
Yes, I remember that war, and ultimately President Reagan actually even provided refueling of your airplanes, because it was a long way to the Falkland Islands. And I've been to Labour Party conferences in Brighton, and I've stopped at the table, the Falklands table. So that was a debate in American politics, but it worked out well. Maggie Thatcher, I guess, probably talked to President Reagan and worked it out. Falkland Islands has been quiet ever since. Northern Ireland's been great since the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes, though unfortunately we haven't got the restoration of power sharing, which is, I think, one of the great disappointments about the 25th anniversary, that one of the main parts of the architecture of the peace process is currently absent.
Yeah, and I think, one of the parties always playing hardball, and maybe that'll change after I think it's May elections. And, I've been in politics for over 50 years, and I understand that. You have to have a variety of conversations. You have to talk in ways that doesn't alienate one group. I think that ultimately they'll be back in with the government in Belfast.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Mulholland. We're very grateful for your 50 years of experience being shared with us this evening, so thank you for joining me. And don't forget, use of you at home, to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Now, the President is expected to arrive in Belfast any minute now, and we will be bringing you updates as and when they happen. But coming up, the junior doctors are striking, and I think they're wrong to be doing so. But neither of my panellists will agree with me, so stick around for the debate. It's 2 on 1.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. And you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Alan, Biden sticking his nose into Northern Ireland is most unwelcome. A real anti-British president. Gary, I had to read out what Gary had to say. Spot on, Jacob. I like it when people say that. Biden does what's good for Biden. And John says, Biden is not coming for the coronation. They weren't happy at the Queen's funeral because he had to sit in the 14th row behind the Commonwealth leaders. He also changed the date of the Belfast visit and avoided the King. So I'm not sure Biden would get the vote of GB News viewers. But let's move on to the calamitous 4-day junior doctor strike, which commenced today, putting immense strain on the NHS. We've heard all sorts of claims justifying their anger, that they've had a real terms pay cut of 26%, or that they're only paid £14 an hour, none of which bears out when you look at the facts. But being the generous people we are, we thought we'd devote this evening's Vox Populi Vox Day to the junior doctors. But unfortunately, only one of them would speak to us. So I should say this person has spoken.
Ultimately, we're asking to be paid exactly the same amount. We're not asking for any more money. We're just asking to restore our pay that's been eroded over these years. And I think this will go a long way into making doctors feel valued, especially, as I've said, we really put in a shift during the pandemic and we were rewarded with further pay cuts. Things are only getting worse as time goes by. We had 500 avoidable deaths a week. That's a jumbo jet of patients. I mean, patients in this country deserve better, and doctors in this country deserve better.
With me now is my distinguished panel, Mr. Jacob Reynolds of the Academy of Ideas, and a regular guest, former Labour councillor Kevin Craig. And I'm delighted that they're both with me and have interrupted Easter week to come on. If you look at doctors 1 year after graduating and 10 years after graduating, people with medicine degrees are better paid than people with veterinary, nursing, engineering, economics, physics, maths, computing, chemistry, politics, business, languages, geography, law, history, biosciences, philosophy, teaching, sociology, English and psychology degrees. What are they complaining about? Jacob?
Well, I think if you speak to lots of junior doctors, you'll know, you probably have, but they have a really raw deal in terms of their immediate terms when they come into the NHS. Of course, as you say, they can expect to get a decent salary as time progresses, but their day-to-day lives are really, really difficult, and they bear the brunt of all of the poor decisions that have been taken around the management of the NHS, the fact that not enough doctors are trained, that not enough provision of services and all these things. And they deserve a degree of remuneration. I understand why people get upset about it.
They get it. In year one, they get £29,384. In year two, they get £34,012. And then it goes up and up. Almost every year they get increments. Kevin?
Well, there are doctors on Twitter today, Jacob, who are taking home after tax about 430 quid a month in their second year post-qualification. Now, some very able person from the research team has put together that lovely list of...
No, this hasn't. This is widely available. This is publicly available information.
But they found it for you, some very able colleague.
I found it myself, actually.
You did not.
I did.
Good Lord.
Yes.
Right. But do you think that junior doctors in this country are sufficiently well paid?
I think they get a fair deal. They're better paid than people with other degrees, and they get pensions that are much higher than anybody else's. They can retire mostly at 60 on, I think, £48,000 a year. The whole package, and not to mention the lump sum they get of £120,000, I think the overall package is a perfectly fair one. And when they become consultants, which junior doctors become...
Eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. They get much better paid, and they're able to do private work, which supplements their income very significantly.
But their hourly rate for undertaking life-saving work in the NHS is akin, in some cases, to, I don't know, working in Pret-a-Manger.
No, it's not. That's been debunked, because that...
Debunked by whom?
Debunked by people who actually looked at the figures and included the fact-checkers who normally back the left-wing facts. They came out and said this wasn't true.
There's a problem with facts tonight. Let me tell you what you said earlier. You said to your lovely audience and listeners, America wasn't with us in World War II. And you should have said at the outset, and you didn't say that, Jacob.
I think it was clear what I was saying.
It wasn't clear. It was. There's thousands of US servicemen in cemeteries in north of France.
They came in 1941, but they didn't come in 1939.
At the outset, that was missed.
I thought that was completely clear from what I've said.
No, so
but we're talking about junior doctors.
We're talking about fact-checking, and why do you think they are out on strike today? Then are they bored?
I think they're deeply irresponsible. They're putting people's lives at risk when they're getting paid after 2 years in their second year £34,000 a year, much better than most people in this country.
But it's a very broad-brush thing to say about doctors, isn't it, that they're deeply irresponsible?
I think to be on strike is irresponsible.
I think that we have to recognise that they, day in, day out, devote their lives to saving people's lives, performing all kinds of routine treatments that we depend on. And they do it in terrible, terrible conditions. The hospitals, as we all know, are falling apart. They're understaffed, poorly managed, over-managed, subject to all kinds of ridiculous restrictions. And they do this at all hours of the day. And if you know any young junior doctors, they lead lives that I wouldn't want to lead at that
so this is the strike is about the BMA asking for a 35% pay increase. So you're saying it's about conditions, but that's a different question. That's not what they're on strike about.
If they're saying, if you pay me more, we'll put up with these conditions. And, of course, the point you hit on correctly is that this needs to be part of a broader discussion about how the NHS is run. Yeah. And I would not support a pay rise just in the sense of we'll give them some money to follow up the problem.
But that's not what they're asking
for. Well, no, they're opening a conversation that we're having now about the way the NHS is run. And it's not run in a way that allows patients to get a decent outcome or doctors to have, like, normal working lives that they can
But this is where Wes Streeting's been so interesting, because he, from a Labour perspective, has started calling for reforms, which I, from a Conservative perspective, very much agree with. And Jacob, to your point, I think that is a conversation we ought to be having.
Yeah, and I think I wish there was space in politics, which I suspect we all might agree with sometimes, to talk about fixing really serious issues without one side or the other knowing that if they dared to do so, the other side would kill them for political expediency. And I've seen it happen. Theresa May, in an election cycle, talked about health and social care reform, really damaged her chances. Previously, Andy Burnham got absolutely mullered, if I may say, by your side for talking about the same subject and later life healthcare reform. And there needs to be a space sometimes, because if you love the NHS, which maybe we all do here this evening, you'll know that there are some really big systematic challenges that all the listeners and viewers are aware of.
And I was visiting my local hospital in Bath Royal United, which as an MP I go and see them from time to time. And they're actually really innovative. They've got lots of ideas for how things could be reformed, and it's just a question of getting that on a national scale.
You're right. And, again, I think about John Radcliffe in Oxford. Incredible work there, where the charity section, which is run by a friend of mine, Sarah Vicari, innovated, raised money and allowed the hospital to reach out into the community and do great work. So there are some really good practice that we should talk about more.
So, to come back to where we started, I think the doctors are irresponsible to go on strike because they are well enough paid, and that the issue is fundamental reform, which this actually distracts us from, and by going on strike they weaken their argument, because as doctors they have a duty to their patients, which is above everything else.
And I think most doctors take that duty very seriously, and they wouldn't be out on strike unless they thought there was a serious problem. I agree with you that we need to have a conversation about reform, and I think plenty of doctors would agree with that too.
But what patients are at risk over the next 4 days, and that is the doctor's responsibility for going on strike.
Doctors don't take that decision lightly, and they wouldn't do so.
It's true, Kevin.
Well, Jacob, under your government, right, we've got
His Majesty's, but never mind.
Yours, in the sense that we all understand it down the pub, right? 7 million people on waiting lists. Okay, you are not without responsibility in this discussion, and the doctors, they are striking for a better salary that allows them to live better lives for the job they do.
They're putting patients at risk whilst they do it.
It is regrettable.
We're going to have to end there, I'm afraid, but my distinguished panel will be back with me later, and don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Still ahead. Those pesky civil servants are up to their old excuses for not working again. Find out what they've done after the break. I reckon the British stiff upper lip is the remedy to their woes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts, and I've had one from a certain Peter Rees-Mogg, to whom I may be related, who says that I don't need to explain basic facts about World War II because my audience is intelligent enough to know. So thank you for Peter to contradicting or having a response to Kevin. And then Jane says junior doctors should get the pay they deserve, just like Tory MP's friends. And Donald says, I do think junior doctors should be paid a lot higher wage than they currently get. tradesmen get paid about £300 a day in comparison to a highly qualified doctor, the system is broken. So thank you for getting in touch. But now let's move to a less controversial issue. 771,433. That is the number of sick days civil servants took off owing to stress and mental health last year. And guess what? It was paid for by you. Now, I can't help but wonder why the civil service is struggling so much. I thought working from home was meant to be the answer to all their prayers and marvellous for their well-being. Well, that's what they told us, but perhaps not. Personally, I think stress is just being busy and that one should stiffen one's upper lip, apply a little bit of starch and get on with life. It's rather a sort of woke BBC concept that you should suffer from stress. And I think the solution is to get off the sofa, leave the picket line of your own front door and get back into the office. But with me to discuss this are my panel, again, of Jacob Reynolds, of the Academy Ideas, and former Labour councillor Kevin Craig. Kevin, don't you think they should pick themselves up, have a cup of tea and get into work?
Well, I think, Jacob, and I would say, as well as being a former Labour councillor and parliamentary candidate, I have founded a successful multi-million-pound business, right? So I come at this from a different perspective as well. Now, maybe some of them in the civil service are still traumatised by the fact that you went creeping around putting notices, sorry you're out. And I was worried about you, quite frankly, Jacob, at the time. So maybe some of them haven't recovered from that. But it's efficiency. And
they can't be that wet.
Well,
they just can't be. I put out 3 notices.
Well, it was extraordinary, wasn't it?
No, you've canvassed as a councillor.
Many, hundreds of thousands
What do you put through the door when people aren't there?
Leaflets.
Sorry you were out when I called. That's what I left on their desks. It was modelled on a sorry you were out campaign card.
Yes.
And I don't think that's too upsetting for people.
OK. But look, the civil service, there is an interesting increase, I think, in society of recorded issues of mental health and stress. Not just in the civil service, you actually also get it in the private sector. So that is interesting. But, you know, in some cases, it's not surprising, given what civil servants have had to go through in recent years.
I worry, Jacob, that stress has become the new bad back, and that there are people with mental health issues who need a lot of support and treatment, but that because stress has become a catch-all, that this is undermining the support available for real mental health distress and is being used by people who actually just don't want to go into work.
Well, yeah, this is one of those stories that both kind of encapsulates a particular moment and also says something deeper about society at the moment. It encapsulates this sense that if you want anything done by the state, it's almost impossible to get it done, that there's a kind of unofficial sense of strike by lots of civil servants, and they just, whether for political reasons or because they just can't be bothered to turn up to work, stuff can't get done. But the deeper issue here is the way that right across society, as you noted, people are encouraged to interpret everyday kind of problems and stresses and issues that you have in your life through the prism of mental health. And that's not just related to work, that happens in education, it happens right across society, in sport, and everywhere. And this is a really serious long-term problem that we need to get a handle with. Why is it that people interpret everything through the prism of mental health? It used to be, perhaps slightly old-fashioned, you say stiff upper lip, but it used to be that you would consider yourself resilient enough to deal with the stresses that life throws at you. Now people take the opposite position.
Yes, and I do get concerned about this. I see it with my children, that they're constantly being given lectures on mental health, to the extent you begin to think they're expected to have a mental health problem, and if they don't, that's slightly abnormal.
Do you really feel like that?
I think it is being, to Jacob's point, it's being made something that you are expected to have, rather than thinking that actually you have a responsibility to get on with life, and only if things are seriously wrong should you be seeking treatment or help.
Well, it's definitely a valid viewpoint. I mean, I would say to you both that I think the fact that we as a society are more happy to talk about mental health these days and be aware of it, be the impact, is a good thing.
It's a good thing. I don't disagree with that.
So I think that's one thing. I also detect a slight characterisation of some civil servants as work-shy, or that mental health is an answer to their prayers in some of the way we've discussed it. And I think most civil servants are really well motivated. They have a desire to serve the country.
Well, I don't disagree with that at all. I would say of the civil servants I worked with directly, I was so impressed by them and their work ethic. And when I was leader of the House and COVID was taking off, they all wanted to do their jobs thoroughly, and most of them wanted to come in to do it. They thought that was important. So individually, I found a very strong work ethic. It's just collectively, why are absence rates so much higher in the civil service than in the private sector? Jacob?
Well, I think, I mean, anybody who's dealt with any kind of if you like, consumer-facing aspects of the state, trying to sort out something related to your council tax bill or getting planning permission for something in your house, or any kind of thing, people will know that there is, despite what you say, there is an attitude of, whether you want to go so far as saying work shyness, but there is a sense that people there are lots of people who work public jobs who don't want to get anything done.
Well,
and anybody who interacts with the state understands that.
I've got to disagree with the Jacob on my right this time, because I served 18 years as a councillor in local government, and I think that the people in local government in public service are sensational. There is definitely something about people in this country feeling that things are not much better than they were 13 years ago.
But they were in the office when you were a councillor. And I think this working from home is a real problem. When I hear in my own constituency from people trying to get in touch with the planning department, they can't get in touch with anybody because nobody's in.
Yeah, but you see, the modern technology, things are different. The productivity is up in many sectors with remote working. I can assure you, with the business that I founded, we've got 110 people across the country in different offices, and number one, I'd have a revolution on my hands if I tried to say 5 days a week now. People would just leave. But productivity is up.
But it's quite interesting that both Facebook and Twitter man are getting people back. I forget his name. Trying to get people back into the office. Elon Musk. Yeah. That's right. He's quite famous. I ought to have remembered his name. But they're both saying that they need to get people back into the office.
But it's undoubtedly. Credit to you, you managed to make that work. Look, for lots of businesses and lots of places where face-to-face interaction is important, that you need to have people in the office for building a sense of camaraderie. That is, I think, an issue in the civil service, perhaps, that people have lost that sense of public service ethos because they're no longer working kind of obviously and collectively for the common good.
But if stress is rising when people are working from home, some of the problems that I've been discussing on this programme before about working from home are real, that there isn't that sense of companionship, of motivation that you get from physically being in an office.
Now, that is definitely a fair point, especially if your living conditions mean you have to work from one room in a rented house. That can be very difficult. But interestingly, in some workplaces, e.g. even some government departments, there are alleged problems with bullying and efficiency in the civil service. Why is the Home Office these days so bad at processing claims compared to the past, again under your watch? Why is that?
Well, I'm not sure the Home Office has been efficient since Robert Peel was Home Secretary.
It was 40% more efficient 10 years ago.
It was John Reid who said it was dysfunctional when he was Home Secretary, and was that Tony Blair or was that early Gordon Brown?
It's got worse though, Jacob, under your administration.
I think the Home Office has not been a strong department for a very long time, but Priti Patel and Suella have both got to grips with the intractable immigration problem and have managed to get the law into a state where we might actually be able to get some people out.
They can't process claims. It's inefficient, and ultimately civil servants, maybe they feel demotivated and badly led and underappreciated. They're not processing asylum claims
quick enough. Well, maybe it's your European human rights law that's caused the problems.
Well, I hope we'll get a chance to discuss this a bit more, I think, so maybe we'll have an item on it if I'm correct. But I mean, to take this back to the mental health issue, I have to actually disagree with something you said in your opening, that it's good that we're spending so much time talking about mental health problems. Because I think that what has happened is that under the guise of destigmatising mental health, we've normalised mental ill health, and it's now considered the norm that you're going to have some kind of mental ill health. And then when, as I say, life throws ordinary stresses at you, people are don't feel equipped to handle them.
We're going to have to apply some stiff upper lips to society, but thank you both. Up next, the coronation is fast approaching, and the woke mob are at it again, and they're after the monarchy. Stick around to hear from the best man for the fight, Professor Robert Toombs.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Doobs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. David says, a former civil servant told me while we were discussing holidays that in addition to her annual leave, that she still had a week's sick leave to take. And John says, doctors deserve a pay rise, but only 10%, and all doctors should have to sign a document to work and stay in the UK for 10 years before going abroad. And Gary says people today are infected with a belief that feeling down is a sign of a mental health problem. Everyone is almost expected to have mental health problems. Well, as we lead up to the coronation, calls for reparation or indeed the euphemistic restorative justice have intensified. Questions surrounding the Koh-i-Noor diamond or on Queen Mary's crown have prompted the family not to use it in the ceremony. And research submitted by The Guardian last week, which famously has slave-linking trade, were met with support from the palace for more exploration into the monarchy's link to the slave trade. But as my next guest points out, Britain was not exceptional in its engagement in slavery, colonialism or conquest. It was exceptional in its actions to bring such injustices to an end. In Britain, we should be proud of our history, not ashamed of it. So who better to have with me than the illustrious history professor Robert Toombs, famous for his book, The History of England, the English History. Professor, thank you so much for joining me. You had a brilliant piece in The Telegraph today setting this out. We were the one country that decided to abolish slavery, and everyone else throughout history had been involved in the slave trade before that.
Thank you for inviting me. Yes, absolutely right. The British Empire, with all its faults, and of course we're always told how many faults it had, its great achievement, one could say, was abolishing global slavery. Until modern times when there's been some return of slavery, unfortunately. But in the 19th century, it was the British Empire that set itself the task of stopping what it saw as, what people in Britain saw as the abomination of the slave trade, and then of trying to stop slavery in Africa particularly, and also in Asia. So the Royal Navy was patrolling to stop slave ships all through the 19th century, and indeed well into the 1970s. It was stopping slave ships into the Persian Gulf.
And do you think that is enough, that compensates for the profits we made from the slave trade? Because obviously being involved in the slave trade at an earlier point, was enormously profitable for both individuals and institutions?
Well, it's very difficult to say what is adequate compensation. Some historians have calculated that the costs of abolition were greater than the profits from slavery, but then I think we wouldn't want to just see it in monetary terms. Our forebears, including William Pitt the Younger, spoke very eloquently about the wickedness of the slave trade and of our participation in it. People saw this as being a terrible crime for which we should be ashamed, and saw the abolition of slavery, insofar as we could bring it about, as indeed the reparation that we would pay for having been involved in the trade earlier. And of course, the costs of
Pitt the Younger has a slightly mixed record, doesn't he? Because although he says that, actually the slave trade isn't abolished until after he's died. He doesn't actually manage to deliver on it, even though he thought it was wrong.
It's a very interesting moral dilemma, which he and people like Wilberforce were very well aware of. We were in the middle of a world war. The trade with the West Indies and Africa was very important. It was very important for the Navy. And so you had the problem of saying, do we abolish slavery now, which might mean we would lose a world war against the French revolutionaries, or do we have to postpone it until time is more suitable, time is more favourable? I mean, it was still abolished during the Napoleonic Wars, the slave trade, as you know, in 1807. And so a great risk was taken. A very profitable trade was given up. Because although some people have argued that slavery was no longer as profitable as once it was, I think modern research shows it was in fact increasingly profitable, and giving it up was a great economic sacrifice. But yes, I mean, you could say,
what about the compensation that was paid?
Yes.
When slavery was abolished across the British Empire, compensation was paid to the imperial slave owners. Do you think their descendants have any moral responsibility that they have got, in a sense, blood money for slavery and that they owe any duty of reparation?
Well, a well-known journalist, a television journalist, recently offered to pay some reparation to charities in the West Indies, if I remember rightly. And I wrote a slightly jocular letter to the Times saying that as her family had received something like the equivalent of £20 million from the taxpayer, perhaps some donation to the National Health Service might also be thought appropriate. These people did get a lot of money in compensation, and it was at the time very controversial. It was the taxpayer who paid to ransom slaves, because it was thought that not to do so would delay the abolition of slavery in the empire. And so it was a considerable sacrifice by the taxpayer. Of course, people have said, well, it shouldn't have been done. It should have been the slaves who received the compensation, not the slave owners. But politically speaking, that was not really possible. And I often think of the contrast with Russia. When the Russian serfs were finally emancipated in the 1860s, they were forced to pay compensation. In the British case, it was the taxpayer who paid the compensation.
And do you think dragging the monarchy into this just before the coronation is an opportunistic political move by the people who are making this such an issue, or was it just inevitable that this would come up at some point in relation to the king?
I think probably both. I think that it's come up now is clearly opportunistic. At the moment, the institution of the monarchy is quite vulnerable because people will be threatening to, in some way, disrupt the coronation or try to spoil the coronation, which I think very few of us would want to happen. Only a few Republicans would want that to happen. It's going to be a great national occasion. So I think that something has got to be done to preserve that from attempts to sabotage it. But I think it was pretty inevitable that sooner or later the monarchy, like many other of our institutions, would come under this kind of attack.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Toombs. I'm so grateful for your time and for your many insights. That's all up from me now, but we're going on to the Venerable Dan Wootton. Mr. Wootton, I think you've got the great Kwasi Kwarteng with you this evening, who is, I think, one of the cleverest people I've ever met.
Yes, that is right. Very excited to have the former Chancellor in the House. Obviously, we're going to be talking all about the political environment, Trussonomics, will the growth agenda come back? And also, this is the first time that he's been able to respond since that lefty sting that he suffered by those idiots led by donkeys.
Well, that all sounds absolutely wonderful. Kwasi is a great man and well worth hearing from. That's going to be the excitement coming up after the weather, no doubt along with President Biden landing. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. See you tomorrow.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Has turned into quite a soggy end to Tuesday for many of us, and low pressure is going to stay with us over the next few days. It's been bringing these weather fronts into western areas of the UK, and they're slowly pushing their way eastwards as we head throughout the rest of this evening and overnight, bringing rain to much of eastern England and up into Scotland. Some heavier bursts possible, particularly across Dumfries and Galloway. Gales across eastern coastal areas of Scotland, and the rain will be falling as snow over the Grampians as well. Some clearer spells developing for England and Wales later on in the night, but that will allow temperatures to drop off down into those mid-low single figures. So quite a chilly start to Wednesday morning. Again, some showers in the west, potential for some snow over the Pennines and higher ground of Erie as well. We then get this second pulse of rain moving back into Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England throughout Wednesday. That will be accompanied by further strong winds, the risk of gales severe along coastlines, 60-mile-an-hour gusts possible. So do take care because there could be some travel disruption and large waves. Temperatures quite disappointing, ranging between 9-10 degrees Celsius, but probably feeling closer to 2 or 4 degrees when you are exposed to that wind. Showers continuing, particularly across the northern half of the UK throughout Wednesday night, generally easing off a bit more across Wales, central southern areas of England. But again, those clear spells will allow temperatures to drop off once again and feeling quite chilly. Into Thursday daytime, the winds will be easing off now across southern areas of the UK, helping it to just feel that slightly bit better compared to Wednesday, but actually quite blustery still across Northern Ireland and northern areas of England. It's remaining unsettled then as we move throughout Thursday and Friday, with another area of low pressure possibly pushing into southern areas of the UK. Potential, though, that things dry up as we head into the weekend, but there's still always the chance that we see further rain in the north and west. Otherwise, bye-bye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me